iPredict works by gathering the knowledge of its 5,000 plus traders. If a stock has a price of 57 cents, that means the market thinks that event has a 57% chance of happening. If you agree, you buy. If you disagree, you short. And if you're right, you make money.
Kia ora, good evening New Zealand. This is day one until the country goes to the polls. Welcome to iPredict Election 2011, the most accurate source of political and economic information in New Zealand broadcasting. Our three predictions tonight. Prediction 1, Trans-Pacific Partnership. iPredict says there's just a 38% chance it will happen before 2015. Dangerous threat to sovereignty or a free market Milton Friedman pipe dream. Prediction 2, New Lynn, Waitakere and Te Atatu. Can National win a second West Auckland seat? Prediction 3, Epsom. The polls say Goldsmith. iPredict says Goldsmith. What happens if Banks loses? To dissect these predictions, let me introduce tonight's panel. He is National's only Islamic MP, the world's top trade negotiator, the architect of the Uruguay Round Agricultural Agreement, and unlike Bill Clinton, he says he didn't hail. Trade Minister Tim Grosser, and he is the political columnist for the National Business Review, the moral shepherd of the right, Matthew Hooton. Welcome to you both. We'll also wrap the show with a final prediction, but let's kick things off with tonight's first market prediction. iPredict says there is just a 38% chance that the Trans-Pacific Partnership will happen before 2015. Tim, last year, WikiLeaks leaked a secret email from New Zealand's chief trade negotiator, Mark Sinclair, to a US State Department official that New Zealand had little to gain from a free trade deal with the US, and that the difficult bit would be convincing New Zealanders into thinking we'd gained anything. Despite John Key claiming in November 2009 that the free trade deal would be worth billions and billions, is John Key gilding the lily, or is Mark Sinclair bluffing?
I thought this was meant to be a fun show, and I'm going to have to start with a very boring point that we don't comment on leaks.
Okay.
So, but let me give you my answer to this. The TPP thing is about the United States plus a group of 8 countries, including New Zealand. If we measure the gains to New Zealand just from that, they're probably very significant, but not massive. Not in the China sort of sphere. Right. But the whole point about this is that it's a stepping stone to a wider agreement. And once you start to involve particularly Japan, that number changes dramatically. So in the long run, I see this as a huge opportunity.
Australia got burnt. Their wheat farmers will scream till the cows come home that their free trade deal didn't work out. How can you make sure that the deals that we cut are going to be valuable for New Zealand?
Well, I'm going to be very blunt. I thought the Australia-US FTA was a crock.
Okay.
And I have said, whether people believe it or not, that I will walk away from an agreement of that quality. Look, I wouldn't have said this, to be blunt, 20 years ago when New Zealand had nothing, nada. But with all the progress that's been made in the last 25 years, we don't need a second-rate FTA that puts, you know, some pressure on some very sensitive policies here in New Zealand, which we will resist, and then gives very little on the positive side. We won't sign that agreement.
We've learned from our mistakes in free trade agreements.
Listen, we haven't made these mistakes. Let's be blunt about this.
Matthew, Australia has felt the intense gaze of America as it shores up its influence in the Pacific against a rising China, with news this month that a new Marines base is being built. Will New Zealand get the same offer we can't refuse from the American military?
This is something that New Zealand has initiated. For many decades. New Zealand's #1, and Helen Clark used to say this, her #1 foreign policy objective was a free trade agreement with the United States. This began through talks in the 1990s. Lockwood Smith was the trade minister, George Yeo was the trade minister of Singapore. They initiated. It's us going to the Americans saying, let's have a deal.
And is part of that deal also the American military?
No, this is an economic initiative by some countries that are genuine free traders. I personally agree with iPredict. I think it's a pipe dream. I don't think it's ever going to happen for the reasons that the minister's talking about. I don't think that the Americans are going to give us anything worth taking. I can't believe they'll open up their dairy market. So if they're not prepared to be a genuine free trade country, then we just walk away. We've got a free trade agreement thanks to Phil Goff with China. There's one coming up with India. If the Americans don't want to play, we shouldn't play.
Do you think that John Key, if re-elected tomorrow, do you think that he could get a ship visit? Do you think if Obama came, we could get maybe a coastal Navy guard coming along because they're nuclear?
Oh, yes. I mean, these things are
Could
symbolic.
he do it?
There's
symbolic.
going to be this parade with some Marines, I think, shortly. But the thing is, the United States is not as important to New Zealand as it used to be. China is now more important to our economy than the United States. China is in ascendancy. India is in ascendancy. The United States is struggling. If we can get access for our dairy products to the US, then obviously, we bend over and take whatever the Americans ask. I don't think that they're going to.
Don't think that's going to happen.
Not the demand that we must drive on the right-hand side of the road. Because the fact we drive on the left is a non-tariff barrier to sell. By the way, I'm trying to put that as a rumour that the Americans may be putting this on the table, and I'm going to be evasive and difficult in denying it.
The thing is, the TPP is a fantastic opportunity for people like Professor Jane Kelsey to have an issue to oppose. She gets to fly to conferences and say that the end of the world is coming. And there's a whole lot of people that have a vested interest in these talks going on and on and on. President Obama likes to pretend, it makes him feel he's got an economic and trade policy when he doesn't. There's a whole lot of junior trade negotiators who get to fly around. And of course, Professor Kelsey gets to piggyback on that. But as the market's saying, I don't think this is going to ever happen.
Question to both of you. China and America are pushing each other for influence in the Pacific. How does a small country like New Zealand best play them off against each other for our advantage?
Well,
why
we don't play them off.
Well,
what we try and do is, look, I think New Zealand is in the best space of any country on this issue. I mean, this is a real issue for most countries, but because we've got this unique relationship with China through the FTA, the deal in Hong Kong, and you may or may not have noticed that in a very subtle way we're moving in that way with Chinese Taipei, otherwise known as Taiwan. We're the only country in the world in that position, literally the only country in the world. So we run that line. We run a very positive approach with the United States. I mean, we'll find out whether Matthew's right or not. Can they walk the walk as well as talk the talk? We'll find that out.
Fran O'Sullivan wrote an incredible column last year detailing how the Chinese wanted to use New Zealand as a test case for their lowest cost capitalism, that at present they had been using it in third world countries that didn't have a hell of a lot of regulation, so of course it was working, but they wanted to try it out in New Zealand. Do you think we could see China having more of a hand in rebuilding Christchurch, for example?
Well, successive governments in New Zealand have run a policy of trying to be in first with the Chinese, so that the Chinese even refer to the 4 firsts, and New Zealand was the first country in the world to agree to have China enter the World Trade Organization, and that got us some kudos. I think we got better access for wool, I think. I can't remember what the details were. And then Helen Clark negotiated that free trade agreement. We're the first to begin negotiations, the first to complete it. And so our strategy, we're a little country that no one's really interested in, obviously. The Chinese certainly are. Well, the Chinese aren't that interested. What we've done is said, we will be a developed country that deals with you before anyone else. So we're both Helen Clark and Jim Bolger and now John Key, I think, have played that very successfully.
The key thing is this. We worked out in the 1990s when I was in MFAT, before I joined the dark side to go into politics, that New Zealand was either first cab off the rank or the last. And boy, was that a good strategic judgment. If we hadn't moved fast on China in line with the 4 firsts, as the Chinese call it, we would be way back in the queue. And I am also very intrigued, but the Russians have agreed to do their first FTA with us. So we've followed this with no power, an open market, and therefore nobody's looking at New Zealand, oh, if only we could get access to New Zealand. What we have done is something really strategically smart. And I must say, give full credit to the Labour Party. We have maintained a bipartisan position on this. And I believe it's paid off for our country.
What dangers does that present, though, in terms of America? I mean, America would look at our cozying up with China, or they would look at their relationship as, do they see it as a threat, or do they see it as something that they can also
I'll tell you this,
it's
with? Really intriguing. Kurt Campbell, the Assistant Secretary of State for Far Eastern Economic Pacific Affairs, or it's a title of that ilk, said the State Department done a study of the visits of Politburo's members of the ruling elite around the world, and from memory, I think we came in number 3. New Zealand? It's astonishing how much political attention the Chinese have given us. But, you know, we have to be very careful here. I mean, I think we've got a superb position, frankly. But I remember sitting in a seminar with Dr. Craig Emerson, the Australian Trade Minister, back in Washington a few months ago, and we're getting from this think tank all this wave of anti-China sentiment. I mean, you could feel it like a physical force. And the question was, is TPP part of a containment of China strategy? And I said, listen, we have got a fantastic relationship with the Chinese. We've got New Zealanders in work because of that. The moment we think this is an anti-China thing, we're out of here. Intriguingly, Craig grabs the microphone from me and says, and so is Australia. So, you know, we have to, it's there, it's something to be conscious of, but I think we and the Australians can manage this.
How do you manage the American relationship and keep them on, I mean, with the symbolic visit,
well,
if you could hook that up?
The two
would that keep the
relationships
Americans
develop.
happy?
I don't think the Americans care all that much what we're doing with China. They have a relationship with China, and I think the Americans should worry a little bit more about their trade deficit with China rather than worrying what New Zealand
Question to both of you. At a 38% chance the TPP will happen before 2015, will you buy because no one says no to America, or short because Tim can hold out for a better deal than whoring Pharmac off to American pharmaceutical conglomerates? You would short, shouldn't we?
Oh, sell it. It's never going to happen.
What? It's never going to happen?
It's a pipe dream.
When are you going to get it up and running?
Those odds are about exactly what I would think.
Really? You'd hold?
I think so. I absolutely reckon that's very smart that that's what the market is saying. That's about what I'd say.
And you can make sure that New Zealand's sovereignty, its integrity, will be upheld by this deal?
Of course.
Thank you, panel. Let's move on to prediction 2. The market says Labour taking New Lynn is a 92% probability, Waitakere a 14% probability, and Te Atatu an 88% probability. Can National pick up a second West Auckland seat? Tim, you're out of the country most of the time, signing trade deals, while David Cunliffe gets lavished with media attention because he overshines Phil Goff. You need a weaker leader to outshine Cunliffe's overshine, don't you?
Well, let's start off with actually the deal that matters. I'm sorry to sound like a crack record here, but it's the party vote that counts. So we've got 3 West Auckland electorates, Waitakere, Te Atatu and New Lynn. And if you look at the socioeconomic data, look, they're just the same people. It is middle New Zealand. Now you look at the number of people in unemployment, it's the middle. Household income, median. There's only one thing that's different from middle New Zealand, and it's especially true in New Lynn, and that is the proportion of Asian people is very, very high. It's a 23.9% compared with about 9% across the country. But that one specific characteristic, this, guys, is middle New Zealand. Now, if we look at the last 3 elections and we add up the margin in the so-called red fortress that Labour had over National, here are what the figures are. Just a tad under 30,000 in 202, 16,000 205, and 208, as the French say, égalité. Actually, we were 500 ahead. So you say, effectively, we're exactly equal at the moment. This is a huge, frankly, political shift.
Labour should be very concerned about this, shouldn't
they? They should be very concerned about
I mean, I don't want to be unkind, but...
Well, that's unusual for you, Matthew.
You know, Tim goes into politics. He's been living in Geneva. He's sort of an urbane Wellingtonian who's used to the cocktail party circuit in Europe.
But so is Mr. Cunliffe.
But Tim Grosser beats David Cunliffe in West Auckland for the party vote.
Look at the joy in your eyes. Look at the joy in your eyes, Matthew.
Something important is happening there, and I think there's something that Cunliffe should worry about. I mean, he wants to be a contender for leader of the Labour Party. If he can't beat Tim Grosser in West Auckland, how on earth does he think he's going to beat?
Maybe New Plymouth. Maybe he tries
David,
New Plymouth.
if you're watching, David, I just want to say that I totally reject the way that's been
Matthew, bashing Bennies never cost anyone votes. Is Paula's tough love what Waitakere masochistically desires?
Well, I think people like Paula Bennett independently from her portfolio.
Really?
She wasn't Minister of Social Welfare when she
No,
won the seat.
no, she wasn't.
But
now they've got plenty of reasons not to like her.
But there is an issue that the people who resent welfare most are people on low wages who are working. And they look across the road and they see someone on welfare and they think, well, actually, you know, I'd work hard, and they don't.
Yeah, so it's a clever tactic. The working poor hate beneficiaries more than anyone else.
Well, you know, there's more tension there. And so what is happening in West Auckland is extraordinary. Labour should be very, very worried. I mean, the sad thing about Labour, I think, and it's bad for democracy in New Zealand, is they don't have any provincial seats at all.
Right.
They're going to lose Palmerston North. In some ways, I hope they win West Coast back from National, so at least the Labour caucus will have one provincial MP in it. And he's a good guy, David.
Yes, you love it.
But what it is
And he's got a very skillful,
Way with
sense of the
words.
one-liners.
He does. Very, very.
I really like Damien's one-liners.
Yes,
But what
yes.
Labour's going to be down to, if it doesn't win the party vote again and West Auckland gets beaten by National again in West Auckland, Labour's going to be a party of South Auckland,
Right.
Wellington bureaucrats, and a few people in Christchurch and Dunedin. And that's all the Labour Party is, and that's very bad for democracy because it is important the main opposition party has a national presence.
Question to both of you. Tau Henry may be the king of tweets, but his drop in the National Party list suggests John Key isn't much of a follower. Is it sink or swim time for Tau and Te Aratu?
No, I don't think so. I mean, he's well plugged in there. He's, lives in the community. Chris Carter is gone. This man Twyford, I mean, is he a carpetbagger? We don't know that. Look, he's got a huge ask, expecting Tau to win the seat, because I think it's a 6,000 type majority for Labour. But I'll be surprised if he doesn't put a big dent in it, I'll tell you this, because for all the stuff around Chris Carter, he worked his ass off in that electorate.
National don't really like Tau, do they? They've got new Māori Party friends. They don't quite need him so much like they used to.
Well, he's had his share of troubles in politics from time to time.
Hasn't he just?
But I think he got a message there. Go and win your seat, and
Right.
you've got a future. But if you don't win your seat, you don't have a future. So that's made him work incredibly hard in that seat. And he knows the first thing he has to do is win the party vote. And I think he's going to. I think Labour is going to lose the party vote in every West Auckland seat, and that is a disgrace for the Labour Party.
If he doesn't, though, it's a career at Radio Live?
Probably.
I see. Question to both of you. With iPredict market saying Labour will hold Te Aratu and New Lynn, will you buy or short?
Oh, look, we'll hold Waitakere. I'm certain. of
Okay,
that.
you hold Waitakere?
I think Tau's got an uphill battle. I
Yep.
think I've got an uphill battle, but I have got an outside chance. I don't know. I'd say 20% chance of winning. I'd say.
The stocks
What are the
trade
stocks
on.
saying?
The stock,
Only 4%.
they're
I
saying
think
Labour
that's-
will
I
win
think
the
that's
seats.
undercooking it.
Undercooking it from 4%?
Yeah.
But
I
more-
mean, those are very good odds. I'd put my chance of winning at 20%.
Well, it's reasonable buy there. You pay
Reasonable buy.
4 cents. It might pay $1 if there's an upset. The more interesting thing, I think, which it definitely sells, is stocks on iPredict saying Will Cunliffe increase his majority, and that is a sell. His majority is going to be slashed.
What's the odds on that?
The odds on that is
He's
only
been working them. He's
only
been working them.
20% chance he's going to increase his majority, but I think it's actually zero.
I think Paul is actually in a lot more trouble in Waitakere than you're suggesting. She only has a 600 majority. There has been a large amount of anger about her and domestic purposes benefit. All of that has come out since she was in.
We'll talk about this on Monday, and you can say that you were wrong then.
Well, okay. Thank you, panel. Moving on to prediction 3. Oh, that bloody cup of tea in Epsom. The polls say Banks will lose, and iPredict for the first time predicts Goldsmith to win Epsom. Matthew, you said on this show that as an Epsomite, you would hold your nose and vote Banks, and that all your fellow Epsomites would jump when John Key said jump. Your own paper, the NBR, says Banks is toast. Is it over for ACT?
The polls did say that National would win it last time, that Richard Worth would win it. So I think in the end people don't tell the pollster they're going to vote for Banks. But look, Epsom voters know what they have to do. We have to vote for Banks. There are 2 candidates. One is the Labour Green candidate, and his name is Paul Goldsmith. And all the Labour Green voters are voting for their candidate, Paul Goldsmith.
The autobiography.
And then there is a National candidate, and his name is John Banks. And most of the National voters are voting for him, but some haven't worked this out. Well, they will work it out in time. We talked about the 4 firsts. There's also the 4 ifs. And this is how Labour wins the election.
That's
if
right.
turnout in South Auckland is high
I've been
because of
pointing
the
that out
scare
in the voice.
campaign,
Yeah, that's
because
right.
Labour is now saying you vote National, you lose your house and your baby
Yes,
in their direct mail.
great politics.
I mean, very, very good politics. It's absolutely
Yes.
despicable, but very effective.
Very effective.
If New Zealand First gets above 5%,
You'll be happy.
and
Very happy with that.
if Banks loses Epsom,
Good chance.
and if Dunn loses O'Hara,
Another good chance.
then there will be
Yeah.
a Labour government. It won't just be a Labour government, of course, it'll be the Phil Goff, Winston Peters, Russell Norman, Maturia Ture, Hone Harawira,
Every
Annette Sykes,
progressive's
John
dream.
Minto
Every Liberal's
government.
dream.
It's unlikely, but the four ifs,
Yes.
and if all those things line up, then Gough becomes
Are
Prime
you a little
Minister.
less certain? Are you a little less certain?
I'm a little bit less certain.
We've talked about it 1,000 times. Rodney Hyde, for all of the things you wanted to say about him, had charm. John Banks has all the charm of a road accident.
Look,
Are you sure he's going
It's
to
not
win?
about him. It only takes a second. We've all done disgraceful things in our lives, and you just go into the ballot box
you
and you
close
just tick
and
Banks,
just tick.
and it's over,
It's over?
and you can forget
Does
about
it hurt?
Look,
A little bit?
Look, in 1987, everyone in Epsom went and voted for Judith Tizzard when she was
Oh.
standing against Doug Graham for
Oh, that's
Labour because
awful.
people wanted to back Roger Douglas.
Yes.
So they had to just tip Tizzard, and they
Yep,
did.
yep. And you can do it? You can sleep with yourself the next day?
Well, no, but
Okay.
it's not the most
Sure.
disgraceful
Okay.
thing I've ever
Okay.
done. It's up
okay,
there.
okay, but it's
not
pretty
quite.
close, isn't
Yeah,
it? Okay.
I'll do it.
Telling Labour Party voters how to vote is all part of the solidarity ethos of the left, whereas the right are too individualistic to be told how to vote. Will this backfire in Ohio as well?
Well, we're going to find out very soon. I mean, in my opinion, the voters of Epsom may well decide whether they have a national government or not on the basis of this decision. And there are many different ways one could commit suicide on television.
Yes.
Answering your question precisely would be a choice one. So I think this is about way above my pay line, isn't it? So I think I've listened very carefully to Mr. Hooton, would be a very carefully coded message to the people of Epsom.
Oh,
Feeling
you're
confident?
not suggesting that I'm just parroting lines suggested to me by the Prime Minister's office.
He was texting them through to you,
Perish the
wasn't he?
thought.
You saw John Banks on the Patrick Gower interview on TV3.
Oh, it was awful.
Awful?
Yeah.
Yes.
But
A train wreck that just didn't stop, did
but
it?
he's the national candidate, and Paul Goldsmith is the Labour Green candidate.
Right. Question to both of you. Who will be the new right party? Let's say ACT do get wiped out. The Conservative Party or whatever fledgling thing Jordan Williams from the anti-MMP will front. Who's going to take that new place if ACT goes?
The right is in trouble. I mean, this new Conservative Party, incidentally, will get about 1 to 2% of the vote.
Yep.
Colin
Doing better than you thought?
Colin Craig spent about $2 million of his own money, mainly in the Rodney electorate.
I don't know if that's allowed, is it?
Well, there will probably be some
Okay, there
judicial
will be.
challenges on
Okay,
that.
yes.
All those votes for the Conservative Party will be wasted. They would have otherwise been national votes.
Yes, that's
so
right.
there's a funny thing with if you vote for the Conservative Party, you're voting for the Phil Gough, Winston Peters, Hone Harawira.
Any chance of him taking Rodney, though? Any chance? None. No, you've ruled on
Zero.
that? Zero?
Rodney, I think, is the
Safest
safest
seat.
single electorate seat in the country.
Right.
And there's nothing about the ambiguity here that exists in Epsom. So he hasn't got a show of winning.
Okay.
So they're going to completely waste
So
their
the
votes.
Conservative Party, you don't see that as a future force in politics?
I think the future of the far right depends on what configuration we get after the election, frankly. So, if we get a national-led government, I think there'll be obvious ways in which the ACT Party can perhaps look at itself and find a way through to renovate. I think the future of the right under the, I don't even think of it as a Labour-led government, because I think the phrase a Labour-led government has connotations that an awful lot of New Zealanders, have from past experience, and we're going to have Labour governments again, no doubt. This is not one of those.
This is a true left.
This is look, I think what we should do is we should start calling ourselves the Bosnia of the Pacific, of the South Pacific.
It would be very difficult.
It's a balkanisation of New Zealand's centre. And under that, I think what the right configuration is impossible for any person to fall
The
for.
thing about that combination is mostly when we have had coalition government, if you think of National New Zealand First or Labour Alliance, it was sort of 80-20. And I think Tim's right that the thing with that alternative government, which has a reasonable chance of happening, John Key thinks it's about 30% chance that he will lose his
fingers
job.
crossed. Fingers crossed.
If that happens, there will be no leader in it, because the Labour Party
Karl
will
Marx.
probably
Karl Marx will be the
well,
leader.
Karl Marx would be the president, but the Labour Party would only be about 60%
Oh,
of
thank
the seats.
God.
But
I have to
Finally.
say, in a
Hallelujah.
spirit of
Very difficult.
one thing I
Hallelujah.
would enjoy in that situation is I'd like to see what would happen to the All Blacks if Hone Harawira's 100% tax on anyone over earning $250,000. What do you think would happen to the All Blacks?
Well, they just set up trust funds in Macau.
Yeah,
It'll be fine.
like Matthew does.
Make no difference at all. No one would pay the tax.
Jordan Williams' new party, Freedom Party, after the anti-MMP.
Look, what's going to happen?
Yep.
I think ACT will get there,
Oh,
and I think then what will happen is poor old Don will be told to go.
yep.
Catherine
Off to
Isaac
the Knackers,
will
off to the
become
Knackers,
leader
yeah.
of the ACT Party,
Yep.
and there will be some new arrangement. But the problem the right has...
That's the transcript from the Epsom Tea Party tapes,
yeah, absolutely.
right?
As you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
I think the problem the right has is you've got these conservatives who care primarily about smacking.
Right.
The wooden spoon brigade,
And then
you've
more
got
than
the
national
social
who don't
liberals,
care,
and
right?
then you've
Who
got
don't care.
and they can't get together,
Yep.
because there's a big difference between classical liberals, who,
Sure.
government out of the bedroom, government out of the boardroom, and these sort of weirdo conservative party
Yeah.
people. I mean, imagine thinking the most important issue facing this country, when there's an economic crisis about to happen in Europe, is whether or not
You can legally
smack
smack
your
your kids. That's right.
You know,
yes.
I mean, it's quite strange priorities.
With the market saying 51% probability that Goldsmith will win, would you buy or short that stock?
I short it.
You'd short it? You're going to lose money there. Okay, so
Short
you're
it.
going
Short it.
you're going to short it. The
Look,
market has turned
I
on
know.
this clearly.
I have trust in the folk of
I
Epsom.
have trust. I know, we know
Are you
what we
saying
have
you
to
don't
do.
believe in the market? Is that what you're saying?
Well, 50-50. The
Oh,
market's probably about
okay.
right.
Thank you, panel. Let's wrap this show with the final prediction. Matthew, your final prediction before we go to the election tonight.
I used to think that Winston Peters would be in the low fours. I think he's got a reasonable chance now of getting 4.5 to 4.9. I still think he's benefited in the last few days with an endorsement from Kyle Chapman and the neo-Nazi white supremacist group, the Right-Wing Resistance Brotherhood.
He's reaching across the divide.
That endorsement's probably worth
Yes,
10,000 votes
at
for
least,
him.
at least.
And Winston is. I've been speaking to Winston today.
Have you?
Actually,
What
on
did he
Radio
say?
Live. He is very angry
Yes.
with me.
Well, he never liked you.
For pointing this out. But
Yes.
you just don't know. With that endorsement from the far lunatic white supremacist Ku Klux Klan
Yep.
end of the political spectrum.
So that could be the end of ACT then. That'll
That
change
could
the
lift
party
him up.
vote.
That
That'll
could lift
change
him
the
up.
party
You
vote.
just never know. Well, the National Front's not running candidates.
Oh,
this
okay.
time,
Well,
you
it's a
see.
sadness. Tim, your final
No,
prediction.
I'd stay out of the market on that one. I mean, listen, I remember at the last election, I didn't watch anything else but that number 4.2 for Winston, because I knew the election was going to hang on that. That's what I'm going to be doing in about 10 hours' time.
Yep. And you think it's going to happen?
It's too close to call.
Too close to call.
Close to call.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Matthew. To my final prediction. Here is what has to happen tomorrow for Phil Goff's X-Wing fighter to have a chance of beating John Key's Death Star. 1. Peter loses to Charles in an Ohio. 2. Actor wiped out in Epsom. 3. The Māori Party lose Te Tonga to Labour and Wairiki to Mana. 4. The undecided swing against the government. 5. New Zealand First gain over 5% and Mana bring in 3 MPs. Failing that, Labour is screwed and John Key will lead the country for another 3 years. Final prediction. I think the iPredict market will be far closer to the end result than the mainstream media landline polls. Join us 7 p.m. Monday for the final 1-hour iPredict post-election show special. We will break down the results and what they mean for the country. Follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook accounts for all my latest election updates. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you Monday for the final show. Cherish your democratic right to vote tomorrow and celebrate the fact that we can transfer political power without violence or intimidation. Good night, New Zealand.